Hey guys, Jim Vanosky with Manufacturing Talks. Today we are going to talk semiconductors. So I've got Gloria Kee. She's with a company called Model N that is a revenue software company for high tech. And she's going to dive into that world, especially around semiconductors, talk about what their big concerns and opportunities are. So Gloria will be with us in just a few seconds here on Manufacturing Talks. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vanosky. Industry has a million cool stories, and Jim talks to the movers and shakers who are making them happen. Let's dive in.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Manufacturing Talks. I'm Jim Vanosky. Today I'm joined by Gloria Kee. She is VP of Product Management for Model N. Welcome, Gloria.
Thanks, Jim. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here. Well, thanks for joining us today. We're going to be diving into the world of technology, semiconductors and things like that. But before we do, why don't you just tell us about your background?
Yeah, so I am the Vice President of Product Management at Model N. I oversee the responsibility of the UI UX team for the entire company as well as the high tech vertical. I have responsibility for the product strategy here at Model N, primarily focused on serving our high tech customer base. And this requires that we always stay in lockstep in terms of listening to their customers, their needs, and understanding and validating the challenges that they face on a daily basis.
Excellent. Yeah, they keep you hopping then, don't they?
Yes, yeah, they keep us on our toes.
I bet. I bet. Well, in that regard, so we're talking high tech, we're talking semiconductors, businesses that are obviously extremely dynamic and have had a lot of things going on here in the recent years. Tell us a little bit from your perspective, some of that history and some of the ups and downs that you've seen the companies in that space grapple with.
Yeah, it's no secret, right? Semiconductors were essentially manufactured and invented here in the United States a few decades ago, right? And for many years, in the early stages, the US dominated in the semiconductor manufacturing space. However, if you look at what's happened over the last, I would say, 25, soon to be 30 years, much of that semiconductor manufacturing and fabrication has drifted offshore, uh, largely because of pricing concessions, and trying to make sure that we could make these chips affordable to all. Now, with that, I think you've seen that we've also allowed for global competition to step into play. And now with all the things that are happening in the geopolitical landscape, and us exiting out of a global pandemic, there's been a huge shift into looking at are there opportunities for us to reshore, but it does come at a cost. And so, if you kind of take a look at the semiconductor industry, they are continuing to grow. It is an industry that has its ups and downs. We continue to see semiconductor consolidation, but also with the advancement of AI, we're starting to see players emerge in this space who are extremely successful, right? Take a look at AMD, for example, or even
Mhm.
NVIDIA, where they've been able to harness the latest and greatest technology to really drive the industry forward.
Let's go back to that point you made about the manufacturing drifting offshore. What was it that drove the cost disparities that had offshore become that much more economically viable?
I think a lot of it is just one, talent, right? We were sort of losing the edge and trying to find the right talent near shore became more and more expensive, right? And to be able to produce, a 32 nano chip, which I know I'm out of date, right? I think nowadays it's significantly smaller than that, is just a costly activity, right? Even being able to create a fabrication shop within the United States is not really cheap, and so trying to find cheaper labor was a big driving cost because people were
Mhm.
looking for profitability. And
Sure.
now, when you go look at what can the global market do, they can do a lot. I mean, recently, a lot of these countries have poured their own dollars into trying to create a manufacturing flagships, right, for commodity products, specifically outside of the United States. And I think it's no secret that Taiwan still holds, with TSMC, the most proprietary and advanced chips in the world, and that technology is very hard to duplicate, even near shore, right here in the U.S.
Yeah, and so that being said, though, you mentioned the pandemic, and we had the disruptions of supply of everything, really, but
Yes.
semiconductors certainly weren't spared. We heard some horror stories around that. We've recovered since then, but that had to raise some concerns in the production world around those kinds of disruptions. Is that one of the elements that is driving people to look at reshoring?
Yeah, I mean, I think, why people are looking at restoring a couple things, right? If we look back at what transpired in 2019 with the whole Huawei piece, specifically in the United States, national security has always been a priority, but became even something that was a household table topic, right? Especially right in the midst of the early stages of the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened, and we suddenly the whole world shut down, and we saw the whole backlog with cars, which are
Mhm.
still recovering, right? But for other industries, a lot of it has recovered, and what that taught, I think, every single country who had a dependency on the global chip market was, oh, we probably need to think about backups. We need to think about our national security and making sure, right, that our most important national secrets are still being protected. And so in 2022, when Biden administration came out with the CHIPS Act, right, they were really twofold. One, it was to bring back talent back into the United States, but also it was also to put in money to incentivize these semiconductor companies to consider reshoring and be eligible for a very large rebate.
So let's dig into that a little more now. I'm a huge believer in competition, but I'm also a huge believer in national security, and so I can see the two sides of the argument. Now, the CHIPS Act um, certainly provides incentives, and we're seeing a lot of construction of new plants because of that. Where do you see that going? How do you see that playing out? Do you see it as a net positive? What's your take on the direction there?
Yeah, I mean, I think all intentions are good. I think people are coming to the realization that it's a lot harder than just throwing, a one-time dollar investment into it, right?
Yep.
There were a few companies that had committed to nearshore, and some of those projects have been delayed, largely because talent pool is something that we're running short of, right? And so
Mhm.
it sort of raises the question of, will these investments continue once the money runs dry in the CHIPS Act, right?
Yeah, and actually, it's one of the things I've commented on is that, there's a lot of people playing up that there was all this construction started and all these plants being built, but you hit the nail on the head. That's the first step, and if you're not considering what that takes then to truly start up, truly get to production, and keep that as a going enterprise over the long haul, then that could be money, wasted. I mean, for me, I look at the Foxconn, different business, obviously, with the situation over in Racine. It's kind of
Yeah.
the canary in the coal mine of what can happen when things aren't well thought through. Do you think that the investments that have happened because of the CHIPS Act will bear fruit, or do we run the risk of those being squandered?
I think they will bear fruit. You'll see some of these companies have started partnering with local universities to try to create programs that can create the right type of labor that's needed to even create a fabrication plant here in the United States, and also the engineering talent, right? That's needed to be able to have people work inside the fabrication itself. In terms of, general direction, I think we're headed down the right path. I think it's just that the investment needs to continue.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk a little more about that workforce thing because that's a point we hit routinely here on the show. It's
Mhm.
everywhere through industry,
Yeah.
obviously. So, specifically in the high tech world, what are the kind of shortfalls that we're seeing today, and what do companies need to do to get out in front of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of the shortfalls that we see today in terms of trying to grab a global talent is when a lot of times when people think about engineering and working in the semiconductor industry, they automatically think you have to be really good at STEM, right? It's not
Mhm.
applicable because you don't actually see the components right in front of your face. They're tiny, right? Minuscule things
Yeah.
that, if you're going down all the way to transistor, sometimes you need a microscope to see it. And so, just the applicability of it is not necessarily taught in schools, and it definitely needs to start there.
Yeah.
And also creating more programs for um, disproportionate targets, right? To bring diversity in thought leadership, specifically among women and people of color, I think is an opportunity there to help people realize that, you can work in an engineering field. It's applicable, it's in your Ring doorbell, it's in the cars you drive, it's in your, Apple AirPods that you use, and make it exciting for the next generation because they're the ones that are going to fuel the, worker base, right, over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting to think about, in broader industry, we talk
Mm.
about, a guy on my show that we just recorded yesterday talked about the silver tsunami, the baby
Mm.
boomers retiring, people who've been around for decades. And you typically don't think about that in the high tech world. And yet it's the truth there too, right? This industry's been around for a long time
Yes.
now, and some of the originators are retiring, right?
Yeah, a lot of it is a change of hands, I would say, right?
Yeah.
You see, there is definitely a pretty noticeable wave of what you mentioned, the silver tsunami. I never actually heard that term, but
I
you're
know, isn't
right.
it great?
Um,
I wish I came
uh,
up with it.
yeah, I'm gonna have to borrow that. That's a good one.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, we're definitely seeing that, but also I think that's where opportunity comes, right?
Yeah,
When one generation sort of passes their torch over, it should create room for a new generation to bring in different ways of thought leadership. How do you invent? How can you, further move past? And like, how much smaller could we get, right, in a chip? How do we make it cheaper? Is fabless the way to go in the future? How can we use AI/ML, for example, to make us more
okay.
cost
Wait,
efficient,
I got
right?
I gotta jump in because you just talked right past me, so I know you talked past a lot of my audience. Fabless and AIML, did you say?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so explain those, please.
So, I mean, I think in, the world of semiconductors, you can have fabless chips. You can have AI/ML powered chips. You can use AI/ML in part of your whole manufacturing process, right? And all of those are ways to be able to get to the type of product that you're trying to serve in your market space.
Yeah,
I think one of the biggest table topics that have come to play thanks to OpenAI table topic conversation right now, every 7, 8 year old knows, hey, what is Chat GPT, right? I know that,
right,
right?
right,
And
right.
so that sort of changes the landscape because everybody is looking at how can we use AI/ML in the semiconductor manufacturing space, right? And as a result of that, I think companies have to look at ways they can use the latest and greatest technology to make it more affordable in this space. I mean, I think that
Right.
part with the whole silver tsunami, the new generation will definitely bring that in as one of their largest areas of focus.
Yeah, and again, it just, um, not having thought a lot about where the, semiconductor industry is versus more legacy, brute force manufacturing. It's surprising to me to hear that really those same concerns and those same potential solutions are valid in both camps. Certainly in broader industry, I've pushed that without further automation, we're just going to die on the vine. We won't have the numbers of
Right.
people to do the jobs that people did in the past. And obviously, if you're not moving ahead in the technology world, even in brute force manufacturing, you're already falling behind. So very interesting that,
Yeah.
that the high tech world is seeing that same stuff.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So that being said, yeah, we've got some investments that government has driven, and those have also kind of compelled companies to invest as well, right?
Right. Right.
And so there's some oomph behind some of these efforts to nearshore, to reshore, to further develop the industry. Where put on uh, your wizard's hat and look into your crystal ball. Where do you see things going? Are you an optimist or a pessimist?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, I think competition will remain. That's what I know for sure. And I think it's only going to get more fierce with the effects of the global pandemic, the CHIPS Act. I think countries are creating also new policies that only add to the complexity of, the whole semiconductor supply chain trade as a whole. I think the race to innovate isn't going to slow down at all. We've seen new alliances get created. I know the US recently proposed a Chip 4 alliance with Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan to make the East Asian semiconductor supply chain more resilient, right? And I think that's very strategic because Taiwan
Yeah.
produces 92% of the world's most sophisticated chips that are 3 to 5 nanometers. And I think, it was something like north of 75% of their 7 nanometers and below are actually created through in Taiwan, right? So creating partnerships like that will become really important. In addition to that, and sort of almost in retaliation of that, we've seen Beijing sort of put in their um, double down on their investments, right? And I
Mhm.
think this year alone, the Chinese government has poured $36 billion, something like that, into the new semiconductor production, so that they become the market leader in legacy chips. And they've sort of outpaced many analyst forecasts around um, their ability to output, right? And so that's something that I think the world's going to be really paying attention to,
Mhm.
right? And we've seen supply chains and even distributors sort of consider should they stay where they are? Should they move to other East Asian countries to create more opportunities? India, Vietnam, right, are reemerging as areas that can go beyond China too, right?
Yep.
And I
Yep.
think, with all also the war, the trade tensions, I think we've seen also a lot of regulation pop up in terms of, who can you sell to based off of how the part is used, and that also adds more complexity. And I think, when you ask me where do you see things going from here, it's definitely going to get more competitive and more complicated.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't heard much about the Chinese response. How much risk is there around there just being overcapacity then?
Right. Yeah, I think that's definitely something that they have to grapple with. I don't think we ever get a true view of what the true GDP looks like out of Beijing, right? But I think that's something that um, the world will have to consider, right? In terms of if China, oversaturates itself, then what happens,
Yep.
right? They will have to um, have the means to advance and move towards more proprietary type chips, but if they're already creating the baseline for commodities, there's no reason why they couldn't learn along the way to become more advanced. And I think that's the piece that we need to pay attention to because while we're focused on nearshoring, we need to make sure that we maintain that edge as leaders in terms of innovation and creating the next generation of people who will bring this area more forward.
Yep. Now, we've touched on AI more on the application side, but as we look at down the road and, obviously not all the hype can be accurate, but AI is clearly going to be a growing force, really the world throughout. How does that drive the semiconductor business and what should companies be looking for to make sure that they're not getting left behind in that regard?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are learning along the way how can they use AI in their processes.
Yeah.
I think when they're looking at um, how can they accelerate this whole process of trying to create that one chip, they'll look at AI-driven tools to help them enhance their decision making, right? So instead of relying on a team of data analysts to collect the data, massage that data. This is where AI can come in and automatically do it for you and allow your data analysts to become better pilots of the data that they're now absorbing, right? Because it's more meaningful. And so, in that sense, you're getting better output or at least more meaningful output in terms of what stage do you start really requiring human intervention versus computer, right, enabled
Yep.
intervention.
Yep. Yeah, that's going to get really interesting is what AI can do to free people up to do what we do best, right?
Right, and even in testing, right? There
Yeah.
are a load of tests in the semiconductor space that AI can definitely do. And it may not be perfect at first, but it can learn over time. And I think,
Mhm.
every semiconductor manufacturer I've spoken to, right? Well, I can't say every, but the majority that
Yeah.
I've spoken to, right, are using AI tools in their business, in their process overall. And, I don't think it's something that's just going to go away.
No, right. You brought something unique because no one has brought up testing before, but, it's one of those things where you say it and it's like, well, of course, that's obvious, but it's not so obvious. And thanks for bringing that
Right.
up.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to jump back to the public policy world
Mm.
and tie it to your crystal ball. If there was one big policy change, new direction, something like that, in the semiconductor world that you would recommend, what would that be?
Ooh. I would say
Good, I made you think.
I think the biggest probably policy change that they should consider is continue their investment in driving early education about the chip space and getting diverse and interests, right, among girls, among, as I mentioned, just different backgrounds of people so that they can think differently, bring that level of innovation, and start it at an early age. Don't block it off and make it seem that, working in tech is only for people who are good at math and science. That's definitely not true. I think there's definitely a lot of room for creativity and application that hopefully we'll see in the generations to come. But I think the investment into making sure that we build that education path forward is really the right thing to do.
Yeah, I love that point about that it's not just, walled off for the people who are, um, adept at STEM. It really does go well beyond that.
Yeah.
And then, think about it from a company perspective. Are there particular things that companies in the space should be, preparing themselves for so they stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, I think, building their presence in terms of being able to partner with schools, local
Yeah.
communities around them, especially for those who are looking to build fabrication plants near shore. That's a great opportunity to go and partner with your local high school to talk about, trade school opportunities or even community colleges to build a partnership so that you are creating a pipeline of talent that can come in and help support the outcomes that you're looking for. And if our outcome is bringing back, nearshore manufacturing and how do we do that in a way that's cost effective, you're going to need people, right? And so I think the most obvious thing companies can do is look at how can they make themselves more well known in the communities that they serve.
Yeah, interesting again, once more, it's right in line with what I've been recommending to broader industry is if you're not
Yeah.
directly involved in helping build that future workforce, then you're falling behind.
Yes.
So
Agreed.
interesting. That's another point of commonality between the high tech world and the less high tech world.
Yeah.
Final question then: what about you and Model N? What are the big opportunities down the road?
I think with Model N, right, and my own opportunities, I think we're always looking at ways that we can solve the challenges for our customers,
Yeah.
making sure that we pay attention. As I mentioned, my sole role is not only to think about the P&L of the vertical that we serve, but also think
Mhm.
about how do we make sure we're paying attention and listening to our customers and their changing dynamics. We know that it is very dynamic, right? We've seen pricing pressures that have transpired over the last 10 years that only are going to continue to increase. And I think this is where myself and, with Model N, will continue to forge a path to be a leading provider in the revenue management space for the semiconductor and ECM verticals.
Good deal. Well, I wish you all the best with that. And Gloria, it was really great having you on. We have not dove deep in the semiconductor world before, so this was just really fascinating.
All right. Well, it was wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity, Jim. It's so nice to meet you today.
Same here. Yeah. Thanks so much. We'll have to have you back down the road. I'm sure there'll be more news coming down the pike before too long that we can revisit in
Oh, I'm sure. I'm
months.
sure.
So we'll stay in touch. Again, thanks for
All
being
right.
on. And of course, as always, thanks to those of you in the audience. You're why we're here. We're now not only every Tuesday, but now most Thursdays, we've got shows coming out. So stay tuned for those. This one to me was just so fascinating, the commonalities between broader industry and the semiconductor world that I wouldn't have expected. I can't promise that all our guests will be as fascinating as Gloria was, but they're all going to be at least a little fascinating. So tune back in. We'll be here for you. But for today, it's Jim Vinosky with Manufacturing Talks signing off. So long.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Watch for new episodes dropping every Tuesday. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.